"Can you pretend to be my husband tonight?" the poor widow asked, not knowing he was a rich rancher. Eldridge County, Wyoming Territory, autumn 1879. The storm rolled in fast over the hills, swallowing the late afternoon sun in sheets of iron-gray rain. Wind tore across the prairie, bending the grass like waves. June Mallory urged her horse forward, heart pounding harder than the thunder. Mud splashed her torn skirt, her bonnet soaked and clinging to her forehead. Behind her, hoofbeats echoed, Seth Marner's men, the man her father had promised her to, the man she would rather die than marry. Lightning cracked the sky. Her horse stumbled, slid in the slick mud, and went down. June hit the ground, pain shooting through her shoulder. She tried to rise, but her leg twisted. The horse scrambled up and bolted into the storm. There was only rain and the shallow pull of her breath. Then came another sound, slower hoofbeats, steady, approaching. A tall man on a black horse emerged from the rain. His hat brim dripped water, shadowing a face carved by solitude. He looked down at her. "You hurt?" His voice was low, roughened by wind. June swallowed, clutching her side. I fell. My horse." He swung down, boots sinking in the mud. Without asking, he lifted her, draped his heavy coat over her shoulders. "You'll freeze if you stay out here," he said. "Relay station's a few miles east. Can you ride?" She nodded, though her ankle burned. He helped her onto the black horse, then mounted behind her, his hand steady at her waist. They rode through the rain until lanterns appeared, the Eldridge stage post. By the time they reached the porch, both were soaked. The attendant hurried them inside. The smell of wet hay and coffee filled the room. The stranger spoke first. "She needs a room and a fire." June lowered her hood, met his gaze in the light. His eyes were deep gray blue, colder than the rain but calm. "Thank you," she said softly. "I owe you." He looked away. No debt, just passing through. When the clerk returned, he frowned at June's soaked dress. "You traveling alone, ma'am?" June hesitated. "My husband was supposed to meet me here," she lied. "He must have been delayed." The clerk grunted but said nothing. He handed her a small brass key. "Room 3. Keep the fire low. Wood's short." Hours later, dry and dressed in a borrowed shift, June sat by the window, watching rain pour down. She had escaped Seth, but not for long. If anyone learned she had no papers, no husband, she'd be sent back. Downstairs, voices stirred. Then boots on stairs. A knock at her door. "Mrs. Mallory." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't given that name. She opened the door a crack. It was the rider. His shirt was clean now, sleeves rolled, the lamplight drawing gold from his damp hair. "The clerk says the marshal's come," he said quietly. "They're checking lodgers. You'll need proof you can stay. They don't like women alone." June's breath caught. "Proof?" He nodded. "Marriage license. Or a husband." Footsteps neared, the marshal's voice, low and firm. June's mind spun. If they sent her back, Seth would find her. The marshal stopped at the next door. She looked up at the stranger. His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. "Please," she whispered. "If they find out I'm alone, they'll send me away. I have nowhere else to go." The marshal's boots drew closer. Her pulse climbed into her throat. June swallowed, her voice breaking. "Can you pretend to be my husband tonight?" she asked, trembling. "Just tonight." He studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he reached for her hand. When the marshal knocked, the stranger opened the door calmly, his voice smooth as worn leather. "Evenin', Marshal," he said. "Name's Rowan DeWitt. My wife was just about to rest." The marshal's gaze flicked between them, the woman in the borrowed gown, the man's hand still holding hers. Then he tipped his hat. "Welcome to Eldridge, Mr. and Mrs. DeWitt. Hope the weather's kinder than the road." As the door shut, June exhaled shakily. Rowan released her hand, his face unreadable. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded, turning toward the fire. "One night, you said." June's heart still pounded. "Yes," she whispered. "Just one night." Outside, the rain eased into silence, but the air between them stayed charged, a storm waiting to break again. By morning, the sky over Eldridge had cleared, leaving only a trail of wet earth and clouds like smoke drifting across the pale blue. Inside the station office, the town registrar hunched over a dusty ledger, scratching names into the pages with a squeaky nib. June stood beside Rowan, her hands clenched in front of her skirt, heart pounding as if it were still galloping through last night's storm. The official looked up. "Name?" "Rowan DeWitt," Rowan said calmly. "And the lady?" "My wife, June." There was the briefest pause before he said it, but no hesitation. His voice was quiet, even, like this was something he had said before. June looked at him, but he didn't return the glance. The registrar gave a disinterested grunt and scribbled them in. "You're both cleared for settlement. Town ordinance gives married couples 1 month's lodging or a land grant, your choice." "Land," Rowan said. That afternoon, they were handed the keys to a small tract of land just east of town, nestled beside the river, where cottonwoods grew tall and the hills curled like sleeping beasts. It had once been a way station for passing herders, long since abandoned. The barn leaned like it was listening to the wind, and the main cabin had only one room and a stove that coughed when lit. June stood at the doorway, clutching the satchel of supplies the clerk had given them, unsure whether to step inside. Rowan was already untying the pack mule and lifting down the bundle of firewood. "You should dry off," he said without looking up. She entered slowly, glancing around the bare space. One bed, one chair, a table so warped it tilted toward the stove. "This place is. It'll hold through winter," he said, "once we patch the roof." That evening, as twilight crept in, Rowan lit a fire and laid a blanket on the floor near it. He didn't take the bed, and he didn't ask her to. Instead, he stepped outside to chop more wood. June watched him from the window, arms strong and silent, as the axe split through the damp logs. When he came back in, his boots left muddy half-moons on the floor. He placed the stack by the stove, then unwrapped 2 biscuits from a cloth and set one down in front of her. "You eat first," he said. She looked at the rough bread, steam still rising from the center. "You did not have to do all this," she said. Rowan shrugged, sitting on the floor near the fire. "Better than letting you freeze." She sat across from him, unsure of how to hold her body, how to meet his eyes. The flicker of the fire caught the sharp edge of his jaw, the scar that cut through one eyebrow. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Pretend for me like that?" He did not answer for a moment. Then he looked at her and said, "You looked like someone who had run too far to be sent back." That night, she lay on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, while Rowan slept against the wall near the fire. He had given her his coat to use as an extra blanket. When she woke just before dawn, the cabin was warm, the stove still glowed faintly, and the firewood pile was stacked fresh. Her boots, once ripped at the sole, had been mended with careful stitches. She stood there, holding them in her hands, staring. No man had ever fixed something for her without asking something in return. Outside, the river whispered through the trees. Rowan was nowhere in sight, but smoke curled from the chimney, steady and thin, like a promise. She set the boots down slowly and whispered to the quiet room, "Who are you, Rowan DeWitt?" There was no answer but the sound of the river and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. The sun had climbed high by the time they finished repairing the western fence. Rowan stood shirtless beneath the mid-morning light, shoulders tensed as he drove the last nail into place. June wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve and stepped closer, her basket of tools in hand. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to a fresh gash near his collarbone. The wire must have snapped while he was stretching it. He glanced down. "It's nothing." "It's open. Come here." She took a cloth from the basket, dipped it in the tin of cool water they had brought, and reached for his shoulder. Rowan didn't flinch. He watched her with that same quiet, unreadable look he always wore, though something in his eyes had shifted, less guarded, more intent. June focused on the wound. "I've seen worse. Years ago, I helped a man who'd been swept away in a flash flood down near the Kansas border. Torn up bad, leg broken, barely breathing. I thought he was dead when I found him." Rowan stilled. Her voice softened as she worked. "I dragged him into an old shed and stitched his leg with a sewing needle and thread I'd stolen from a traveling merchant. It was raining so hard I couldn't hear him breathe. Just watched his chest rise and fall all night, like it might stop at any second." Rowan's breath caught just slightly. She dipped the cloth again, rinsed the blood from his skin. He never said a word, just stared at me with these pale gray eyes like he was trying to remember who he was. She met his gaze then, almost startled by how familiar it suddenly felt. "I never even knew his name," she said. "He passed out holding my hand and was gone by morning. I never saw him again." Rowan's voice was quiet. "You saved me." June froze. He looked at her, steady, certain. "That flood, 5 years ago, south of Abilene, that was me." She stared at him, lips parted, cloth still in hand. "I remember the fire in your hair," he continued, "and the sound of your voice. I remember thinking I'd die in a stranger's arms, and for some reason, it didn't scare me." June's throat tightened. I don't remember your face, just your hands. You held mine so tight, like if you let go, you'd vanish." His gaze softened. "You were the only light I saw in that darkness." She looked away, blinking fast. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "I wasn't sure, not until now." His voice dropped. "But I came west, hoping to find you, not knowing your name, just chasing the memory of someone who pulled me back from the edge." June couldn't speak. The air in the field felt heavier, but not with heat. "I'm no hero," she whispered. "You didn't have to be," he said. "You were kind. That's rarer than anything out here." She pressed the cloth once more against his skin, hand trembling slightly. Their eyes met again. Something old and nameless passed between them, like a thread stretched across time, frayed but unbroken. When she pulled her hand back, he caught it not tightly, not possessively. Just held it like he had that night in the storm-soaked shed. Neither of them spoke. In the distance, a hawk called above the trees, and the river carried on, unaware. It was market day in Eldridge, and the town bustled with motion. Wagons lined the square, chickens clucked underfoot, and the smell of warm bread mingled with horse sweat and sawdust. June walked beside Rowan through the narrow lanes, holding a folded list in her hand. She felt more at ease in town than before. People no longer stared at her with suspicion. They saw her with him, and that was enough. Rowan carried a small sack of grain over one shoulder. He wore a plain shirt and work trousers, the same as every other man, but still he stood out. It was the way he moved, unhurried, deliberate, like someone used to having the world wait for him. They paused by the blacksmith's post to check on new horseshoes. The old smith, a sunburned man with one good eye, looked up from his work. "Mr. DeWitt," he said, nodding respectfully, "thought you'd left this place for good." June blinked. Rowan gave a short nod, just passing through. But the blacksmith wasn't the only one. As they moved through town, more eyes followed them. A woman at the dress shop curtsied. A ranch hand tipped his hat and whispered, "That's him." Children stood still at the candy stall. And someone said it aloud. "Rowan DeWitt," a merchant called out, smiling as he handed over a bolt of cloth to another customer. "Well, damn. Thought you were back east for good." June stopped walking. Her hand tightened around the list. Rowan didn't look at her. It was only a moment, but the silence between them grew sharp. She didn't speak again until they were outside town, wagon loaded and wheels creaking along the trail. "You lied to me," she said quietly. Rowan didn't respond at first. The reins were loose in his hands. The horse trudged forward. "I never lied," he said. "I just didn't tell you everything." She turned toward him, her voice brittle. "You let me believe you were just a drifter, just someone who helped me out of kindness." "I did help you out of kindness. You are Rowan DeWitt, the Rowan DeWitt. People in Eldridge talk about you like you're a legend. Your family owns half the valley. You walked away from it all, why?" He looked at her then. Because none of it felt real. I grew up in a house where no one meant what they said. Men cared more about the name on a gate than the woman they married. I left that behind a long time ago. June looked out across the hills. The wind caught her hair, lifting the strands like smoke. "So what am I?" she asked. "Another rescue? Another broken thing you can fix to make yourself feel whole again?" His brow furrowed. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it, Rowan?" Her voice cracked. "You came here looking for me, and I did not even remember your face. You kept your name from me. And now what? I am supposed to feel honored that the great Rowan DeWitt called me his wife for a few nights?" He flinched at her words. For the first time, he looked unsure. "I did not want to burden you with who I used to be," he said. "I wanted something honest. You were the only honest thing in my life." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she held them back. "This was never honest," she whispered. They rode in silence the rest of the way. When they reached the cabin, June climbed down before he could help her. That night, she packed what little she had into the canvas sack she had arrived with. She left his coat folded neatly on the chair and placed the mended boots by the door. She did not wake him. She walked into the dark alone, following the river's edge, her footsteps silent beneath the rising wind. The night was colder than it should have been. The sky was clear, but the wind had teeth. June walked fast along the riverbank, trying to ignore the ache in her feet and the way the shadows seemed to shift behind every tree. She had no plan, no destination, only the instinct to run. A rustle in the brush made her stop. She turned, too late. Rough hands grabbed her from behind. A cloth pressed to her mouth, a voice snarled in her ear. "Did you think you could run forever, girl?" She struggled, kicking, biting, but it was no use. Two men hauled her onto a wagon waiting just beyond the trees. One held her down as the other tied her wrists. Seth Marner stepped into view, coat flapping in the wind, hat low over his brow. His face looked leaner, eyes more hollow, but his voice still oozed menace. "I paid good money for you," he said, "and I always collect my debts." June spat at him. "You paid for silence, not marriage." He pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket. "Signed and sealed. You're mine, June. That preacher didn't file the annulment, and the law's on my side." She stared at the paper, her breath ragged. "You forged that." He smirked. "Prove it." The wagon lurched into motion, heading south along the trail. June's heart pounded, her body aching with fury and fear. She prayed someone would see, someone would stop him. But no one came. Until the second night. They had stopped at an old cattle camp, barely more than a ring of stones and canvas tents. Seth's men were drunk, laughing around the fire. June sat tied to a fence post, lips cracked, wrists raw. Then, in the distance, came the sound of hooves. Fast, alone. A figure emerged from the dark, riding hard. Rowan. He rode straight into the camp, no gun drawn, just fury burning behind his eyes. "Let her go," he said, voice steady as steel. Seth stood. "You again. Thought you'd had your fill." Rowan dismounted slowly, calmly. "She's not yours." Seth laughed. "You think you can waltz in here, unarmed, and play hero? That girl belongs to me." "No," Rowan said. "She belongs to no one." Before Seth could reach for his pistol, Rowan was on him. The fight was brutal, quick. Fists cracked against bone. The other men scrambled, surprised and half drunk, but Rowan moved like he had nothing to lose. One of Seth's men lunged with a knife. Rowan took the cut across his ribs without pause, knocked the man flat. Then he was beside June, cutting the ropes with a hunting blade he had pulled from his boot. "You all right?" he asked, breathing hard. She nodded, tears streaking down her dirt-covered face. He pulled her onto the horse and climbed up behind her, blood darkening his shirt. The camp came alive with shouting, but Rowan kicked the horse hard, and they vanished into the dark, wind screaming through the pines. They rode through the night, torches flickering far behind them like angry fireflies. The hills rose up like guardians, the path winding treacherously down toward the river. By dawn, they reached Eldridge. People gathered as the two riders approached, June clinging to Rowan, his arms around her, clothes torn and blood-soaked. He slid from the saddle, nearly collapsing. Gasps rippled through the townsfolk. Someone ran to fetch the doctor. Rowan leaned on the saddle horn, barely standing, but his eyes never left June. "You came for me," she whispered. "I would have crossed every mile between here and hell," he said, voice hoarse. She caught him as he staggered. Together, they stood in the orange glow of morning, broken and whole all at once, as the town watched in silent awe. The doctor had stitched Rowan's side with steady hands and few words, then left him with a bottle of laudanum and a warning to rest. But Rowan didn't rest. Word traveled fast in Eldridge. By the end of the day, the telegram had reached his father. The elder DeWitt arrived the next morning. He came in a black coach, drawn by a team of glossy horses, his presence as cold and sharp as the winter wind that blew in behind him. He stepped down with a polished cane, silver rings on every finger, and disdain carved into the corners of his mouth. Rowan met him in the town hall, a bandage wrapped around his ribs, his coat still blood-stained. "You look like hell," his father said. "I've seen it." The old man gave a humorless chuckle. "So, this is what you've become, a ghost in your own legacy. I walked away from that legacy, remember? You walked away from responsibility, from your name, and now you want to throw it away for a girl with no fortune, no standing, and a trail of scandal behind her?" Rowan's voice was calm. "She saved my life. Twice, once from death. Once from becoming a man like you." His father stepped closer, voice low and bitter. "If you marry her, the estate is no longer yours. The ranch, the holdings, the DeWitt name, all of it goes to your cousin Edward. You'll be cut off." Rowan looked him in the eye. "Money can be earned back," he said. "A woman like her, you only meet once in a lifetime." The elder DeWitt stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out without another word. That afternoon, Rowan stood beside June in the Eldridge courthouse. Her wrists were still red from the ropes, her dress torn at the sleeve, but she stood tall, chin high, eyes clear. The magistrate unfolded the papers brought forward by the town lawyer. "This marriage contract between June Mallory and Seth Marner is hereby deemed void under territorial law. Grounds: coercion, fraud, and lack of free consent." He looked at her. "You are no longer bound to that man. You are free." June exhaled, as if she had been holding her breath for years. Rowan stepped forward. "There's one more matter," he said. The magistrate raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Rowan turned to June, took her hand. "Nothing we've done has followed tradition," he said. "We met in a storm. We pretended out of desperation, but I meant every quiet moment since." June's eyes widened, searching his face. "You do not owe me anything," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." He reached into his coat and pulled out a simple silver ring, scratched and old. "My mother's," he said. "It's not much, but it's real, like this." June's voice trembled. "Is this what you want?" He nodded. "Only if you say yes." And in the quiet courtroom, with no music, no priest, no audience beyond a few curious townsfolk and one exhausted clerk, June nodded back. "Yes," she said. Rowan slipped the ring onto her finger. Outside, the wind carried a burst of late autumn leaves through the open doors, as if even the trees were ready to let go of the past. The wind rolled through the grasslands like a hymn, tugging at skirts and coat hems, carrying the scent of cedar and distant smoke. Out in the open field west of Eldridge, the townsfolk gathered, not out of obligation, but because word had spread, and something about this day felt different. A wooden platform had been built hastily with fence boards and borrowed nails. There were no ribbons, no polished pews, only a few chairs for the elders and stumps for the rest. A trail of boot prints marked where people had walked from the town square to witness what was coming. Rowan stood at the center of the platform, a simple linen shirt tucked into dark trousers, his hair combed back but wind-blown again in seconds. He waited with his hands folded, eyes searching the crowd until they found her. June stepped out from the tall grass like something the prairie had kept hidden too long. Her dress was plain but clean, her hair braided back with strips of soft leather. Around her shoulders, she wore the coat Rowan had first given her in the storm. In her hands, she carried a ring of horsehair, woven into a loop, knotted at the ends. She had made it herself the night before, sitting beneath the stars. When she reached the platform, Rowan extended a hand. She placed hers in his. He turned to face the gathering. His voice was clear and low, steady enough to cut through the wind. "The night we met, she asked me to pretend, just one night, just long enough to pass through the storm." He looked at June. "I never stopped pretending, because I never wanted to stop being hers." A hush fell over the crowd. Children leaned on their mothers. Old men removed their hats. "I lost my name once," Rowan said. "Gave it up. Didn't think it meant anything. But she gave it back to me, not because she had to, but because she believed there was still something worth saving in me." He took a breath, held her hand tighter. "That night, you asked me to be your husband." He smiled just slightly. "Today, I ask you to be my wife." June's voice, when it came, was soft but sure. "No gold, no paper, no preacher ever meant as much to me as a man who came for me with nothing but his bare hands." She lifted the braided ring and slipped it over his finger. "I'll walk beside you," she said, "not behind, not ahead, just here, where the wind is." Rowan took a matching ring from his pocket, hers, made the same way, and placed it on her hand. There was no priest, no kiss demanded by tradition. Only two people who had earned each other through fire, through loss, through quiet acts that meant everything. For a long moment, the prairie held its breath. Then someone clapped a single calloused hand and then another. The sound grew, a rhythm of approval, of hearts moved. Even those who once doubted June now rose to their feet, faces open, some even smiling through tears. They were not just witnessing a marriage. They were witnessing a choice. To start again, to be better, to love, not despite the scars but because of them. The wind howled once, and then softened. And beneath that endless western sky, Rowan and June stepped down from the platform as husband and wife, not in name alone, but in every way that mattered. The seasons passed quietly after the wedding. The cabin by the river, once weathered and bare, grew into something warmer, fuller. Rowan rebuilt the porch by hand. June planted wildflowers along the edge of the fence. They worked side by side each day, mending saddles, fixing gates, hauling water not out of obligation, but out of a rhythm that had become theirs. Rowan never returned to the DeWitt estate. Letters came for a while, sealed in heavy wax, carrying offers, inheritances, and apologies dressed in legal language. He burned them all in the stove without reading. June never asked what they said. She only watched the flames and the way Rowan's jaw tensed, then softened. He had made his choice. Their little farm grew slowly, stubbornly. Chickens scratched near the barn, and a pair of old draft horses plodded through the fields. Rowan taught reading to the neighbors' children on Sundays, using scraps of paper and hand-drawn maps. June kept a ledger, sold soap and bread to travelers, and sometimes told stories to the children while they ate. At night, they would sit on the porch, June's head resting on Rowan's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The sky above was always bigger than memory. One rainy afternoon, June was sorting through an old chest they had found in the barn, mostly filled with rusted tools and rat-nibbled blankets, when she noticed a small leather pouch tucked in the corner. Inside, folded with care, was a square of fabric, faded, stained, edges fraying. Her breath caught. It was the cloth she had used to bind Rowan's leg 5 years ago, the night she found him in the flood, the same cloth she had torn from her own dress without a second thought. She ran her fingers over it, the fabric soft from time but still holding its shape. On one edge, faintly, were initials she had stitched in with charcoal thread, not his name, but a mark to say he had been seen, that he had mattered. She turned, finding Rowan in the doorway. "You kept it," she said. He didn't need to ask what she meant. He simply nodded. "You saved me twice," he replied. "Once with that, and once when you came back." She stood and crossed the room, pressed her palm to his chest, where the scar lay hidden beneath his shirt. "You're the only place I ever came back to." That evening, they sat on the porch together as the sun dipped low behind the hills. The golden light spilled across the tall grass, turning the prairie into a sea of fire. Crickets began their nightly song. A breeze moved gently through the cottonwoods. June leaned into him, eyes on the horizon. "That night," she said softly, "I asked you to pretend to be my husband." Rowan glanced down, a smile ghosting his lips. "I remember." She turned to him, her voice steady and full. "Today I do not have to ask, I just need to be beside you." He kissed her temple, slow and sure. And as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, they sat together in silence, exactly where they belonged. And so, beneath the endless sky and the whispering grasslands, June and Rowan found not just love, but home. A love born from storms, stitched in silence, and sealed without gold or glory. Just truth, just choice. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it made you believe, even for a moment, that love can rise from the roughest soil, then hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales where bullets miss but hearts don't. New stories every week, new reasons to believe. This is the Wild West, and love still rides here.